Now, while we're here in the area filming in the Peak District, it would be an absolute scandal if I didn't get out and about and explore the countryside. Well, that's exactly what I did. I went off to find out more about the history of Britain's first national park. 555 square miles of unspoilt moorland and limestone dales make up the Peak District National Park that came into being in 1951. These days we take our mighty and magnificent national parks for granted. We just park the car up and step out into the great outdoors. Each year more than 22 million people do exactly that, right here. But it hasn't always been that simple. Indeed, in the early years of the 20th century, this idyllic and rugged landscape became a battleground. From 1600 to 1860, successive parliamentary enclosure acts had in effect fenced off half of England's countryside from the people. It sounds far-fetched to say that access to the open countryside here ended in violence and arrests, but that's exactly what happened. The moorland was owned by various different private estates and landowners, and they were keen not to let trespassers on their lands. So, to the working class people of the large cities like Sheffield and Manchester, the countryside was visible, but it wasn't accessible. But they had some powerful allies and were determined to both preserve the landscape and to open it up to the wider public. Ethel Haythornthwaite, the daughter of a Sheffield scrap metal merchant, used her wealthy contacts to buy up swathes of the peaks, which were then gifted to the National Trust. And Labour activist Burt Ward campaigned for access to open countryside by forming the first working-class ramblers group in Sheffield. Local journalist Rowley Smith tells me they played a crucial part in achieving reform. How closed was the countryside to the working folk and why?
You have to remember, Paul, that these wonderful moors around here, Kinder, Bleaklow, all the highest points of the Peak District, were actually visible from the homes and workplaces of the people living and working in Manchester.
You could see that from Sheffield, couldn't you?
You could see them, yet you couldn't walk on them.
No.
Kinder Scout was the forbidden mountain in those days.
That's frustrating.
So it was frustrating.
How key was the work of Burt and Ethel?
Well, it was absolutely essential, really, because Ethel was the founder of the campaign for protection of rural England in Sheffield, which later became the Friends of the Peak. And Burt Ward was the founder of the first working class rambling club in the country, the Sheffield Clarions, in 1900. And those two people were absolutely vital for the opening up of the countryside and the campaign to make it a national park.
Sure. I understand there was a huge atmosphere brewing up amongst the working class people. You know, they were denied access to huge parts of this open land.
Frustration was enormous. So they used to trespass, and Burt Ward and others trespassed regularly on places like Kinder. He called it the gentle art of trespass. And he encountered gamekeepers all the time.
Sure.
In fact, he had a writ served on him not to walk on Kinder Scout at one point, but he still did.
And this is Kinder Scout, and at 2,000 feet, it is the highest point in the Peak District. And it's the scene of a major battle between, on one side, the ramblers, and on the other, gamekeepers protecting their employers' land. Describe the trespass. What happened?
Well, there was a group of ramblers from Manchester called the British Workers' Sports Federation. In fact, they were a communist group. They decided on what we would call today direct action. They said, well, if there was enough of us, they couldn't stop us. So one sunny April morning in 1932, about 400 of them gathered at Hayfield, which is the other side of the hill from here, and decided they would do a mass trespass. This is the first time those words had been used. And they publicised it so everybody knew they were coming. And they set off up a right-of-way and deliberately trespassed up onto Kinder Scout. And they were met by a line of gamekeepers who were ready and waiting for them. And there were a few scuffles, but they went on and met another group who had come over from Edale, this side of the mountain, and they had a victory meeting. And after that, they all went back down into Hayfield. The police were waiting for them. 6 of them were arrested, and 5 of them were actually charged with public order offences, basically, and were imprisoned for up to periods of up to 6 months.
What was the significance?
As a result of this, and particularly as a result of the severe sentences handed down by the judge, it actually united the Ramblers' cause.
I'd imagine it would, yeah.
And they were fighting then, not just for access to mountain moorland, but also for national parks. And
all
here
over
we
the,
are.
All over the country. Yeah.
And here we are.
History was made.
History was made, and this is the first national park, and it's the best as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you live on its doorstep, don't you? It's beautiful.
By the late 1930s, the CPRE, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, were running hard-hitting films in cinemas all over the country, demanding that urgent changes be made to access to the countryside.
Will you always be content with confined spaces? Or are you going to take the road to national parks, the road to freedom, freedom of England's country? That is the case for the defence of our right to the beauty of our land.
Finally, in 1951, the first 4 national parks were designated, the Peak District being the first to open, followed by the Lake District, Snowdonia and Dartmoor. People power had paid off, and now vast open tracts of countryside were being protected for future generations to enjoy.